Welcome to the next build here at Walker Street Shipyards. I have cleared off my workspace of everything from the Marilyn Monroe kit by X Plus and preparing to build this bust of Boris Karloff from the film The Body Snatcher, directed by Robert Wise. This is going to be my first build of a bust. I'm really looking forward to it. In addition to that, it is also my first build of a work sculpted by Jeff Yeager. I'm going to talk about Jeff Yeager a little bit later in this build chapter, but now I want to get things into the paint box and get started. It is a dreary, cold, rainy day here at the shipyard, the perfect afternoon to get started on a new build. I'm going to use Tamiya's fine gray surface primer for all of this stone work, and while I'm at it, this is actually a Jeff Yeager threefer because I have these two kits. This is the base for Jeff Yeager's Dracula, Hammer Dracula model kit with Christopher Lee as Dracula, and this Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. Since there's going to be a lot of similar coloration for these three stone bases, I'm just going to hit them with primer all at the same time. So again, a threefer from Jeff Yeager. Let's get these stone bases into the paint box. I have hit this with two fine coats of Tamiya gray surface primer, then two light dustings of Tamiya flat black. Next, I'm going to make a base coat with a mixture of Liquitex titanium white and Liquitex ivory black acrylic paints. So I've got my mixture of a medium gray mixed with the black and the white acrylic Liquitex paint, and going to give everything a good coating. There, to add a little contrast to the gray and to spice up the color palette, I have made a dark red by mixing Liquitex Pyrrole Crimson with Liquitex Ivory Black, and I'm going to apply it to just one of the bricks. A little bit goes a long way. Time to add some highlights and dimension through dry brushing. I'm using Liquitex Titanium White and an older but still flat-edged brush. Very lightly brush over the entire surface. The next step is to add a wash made of Liquitex Ivory Black and just regular tap water. I think it's about a 70% water to 30% paint ratio. This is going to make a lot of the surface detail pop up. The wash will sink down into the features. It'll also add a good sense of age and grime to everything. Take the wash, spread it with a brush, and you can see right away it is sinking into the recessed areas, and a lot of the detail is already starting to jump out. You can move a lot of the very liquefied paint around, get it to flow where you want it to go and into the recessed spaces where you want it to sink. And then also, once it has gone into those recessed areas the way you want, fill in the mortar and the grout lines. And then also go to certain areas where you want to add maybe just a little bit of grime. This coat, since it is mostly liquid, will take a lot longer to dry than previous coats, particularly the dry brushing. But the good news is we're almost done, and there is just really one step left. Now that the wash of the acrylic ivory black has dried, the final step in this process is going to be surgical application of dry brushing with acrylic titanium white for weathering. I'm not even going to use a paint tray because there's so little of the white to be used. Put a little bit on a fairly good, expensive flat edge brush, and then come back on the corner surfaces first and highlight those areas. And if there's an area where you get a little bit too much paint, more than you needed, you didn't quite scrape off your brush enough, you can come back with a dampened Q-tip and rub it all away, clean it all up. You don't have much time because this is dry brushing and the paint dries very, very quickly. But get to it very quickly and you can take care of your mistakes. And so again, a lot of your cornered areas. The base is done and turned out great. I got an ancient weathered stone finish, mostly using Liquitex acrylic paint. I especially like this creepy guy here right in the center. So what's next for this build? It's time to put the base aside, move on to the torso. I'm going to get this piece into the paint box, give it a few dustings of Tamiya flat black, and then start working on the clothing details. So I'm very happy with the outcome of the torso portion. I started everything off with a dusting of Tamiya fine gray surface primer, then a light dusting of Tamiya's matte black, then came back in with a wash of Liquitex manganese blue and a little bit of ivory black. It was probably about a 60% paint to 40% water, enough that the paint still had some consistency and viscosity, but enough water that everything could flow and move around, and was able to apply with the brush and move the paint around. Gave it 2 coats, and honestly, when I finished the second coat, I was very happy with the blue color, and spent about a week going back and forth and looking at it in different lighting and tried to determine if I wanted his coat to be blue. The look was a lot like what you see here on where the cape flaps over, a little bit darker. But in the end, I decided I wanted a brown tone and not a blue tone. So years ago, when I did the Mobius Invisible Man kit, I was very happy with the look that came out for his coat, not his overcoat, the houndstooth decaled overcoat, but his interior coat, where I used a colonial blue as the background, and then built up layers of brown on top of that. And I've always liked the fact that you could sort of see through the layers of brown into that blue base coat. And so I came back with a mixture of mostly raw sienna, a little bit of burnt umber, and a little bit of the ivory black, and dry brushed 2 very, very faint coats of the brown over the blue, and in the end came out with a really fantastic brown tone that I'm very happy with. Experimented with the buttons a little bit. I tried to make them a little bit lighter, and in the end they just kind of really stood out and didn't quite look realistic. I went for a dark red for his tunic. For the scarf, it's a mixture of different brown tones, orange tones, and yellow tones. And so again, now I'm very happy with the overall look of this tunic. Finished it all out with a dusting of Tamiya flat clear. I'm really happy with the sort of cloth-like look of everything. So now it's time to move on to the flesh tones. I've given his flesh portions a coating of Tamiya's fine pink surface primer. And so what's going to come next is a dark and somewhat ruddy brown tone mixed with raw sienna, burnt umber, and a little bit of unbleached titanium. That'll be a darker brown base. I want his overall facial features to be sort of a ruddier look, like this is a real working class man in dirt poor Scotland who digs graves for a living. Digs up corpses for a living, actually. So I'm going to want to have dirty fingers and caked fingernails. I'll start building up a flesh tone of different colors on his hands. We'll start moving on to the facial features. So now let's get going with the flesh tones. So after the initial dustings of Tamiya's fine pink primer on his hands and his face, I mixed up my base coat of Liquitex burnt umber, raw sienna, a little bit of pyro crimson, a little bit of black, and a little bit of titanium white, and gave him a deep ruddy finish. Followed that up with a wash made of titanium white and just plain tap water, and gave him 2 fine washes, and came out with a really pretty cool look. I think I may remember this if I ever do a zombie kit or maybe a ghost kit. And you can see through the wash, that white wash, and see down that there is some of that ruddier face tone that is coming through. Then followed up, once again mixed up my flesh tones of these colors and gave him a dry brushing over that washed white, titanium white. And it looked pretty good when I first finished it, but then when I came back after that dry brushing had dried, it looked really horrible. He had this brick orange tone all over his face. His whole complexion was just orange. I was a little bit afraid that he was going to run for public office, so I was kind of distressed, and I actually picked him up and was about to put the head portion back into the paint box and just start from scratch, give him another base coat of the fine pink primer, and thought, no, let's give one more shot. So I made up another flesh tone base coat, a little bit less of some of the elements that I thought may have resulted in that orange cast, and did another dry brushing, and really ended up getting the face tones that I liked. I decided to come in at that point and give him his hair, his sideburns, and his eyebrows, and that really helped even out the whole look. So after that, it was just come in and do the work on the eyes and the lips and a little bit of fine adjusting on everything, and I'm happy to say that his overall flesh tone came out really great, a really fantastic, realistic finish on everything. I'm very pleased with his eyes. So Boris Karloff is looking pretty great and ready to do some grave robbing. So of course a good grave robber is nothing without the tools of his trade. So now it's time to get started on his shovel. Well, a lot of life has happened since I finished off Karloff's torso and head and shot the sequence that you just saw. It's been actually almost 2 months since I've shot that sequence. My wife and I, after putting it off for almost 6 months, finally took time away from work to take a 2-week honeymoon, traveling over to England, staying up north and seeing some wonderful things, and finally spending a week down in London. Then almost the second that I got back to work, jumped on an airplane to fly out west for a municipal conference. Now I am back, settled things down, and it is time to finish up this kit because honestly I am ready to be done with Karloff the Body Snatcher and move on to the next Jeff Yeager kits actually, which will be the Chris Lee Dracula in the Peter Cushing Van Helsing. So got just about everything done, and we're down to the spade, the little pieces of ironwork that'll go on the base, and then the nameplate. Haven't quite figured out what color scheme I want for the nameplate. I'm leaning towards maybe some type of pale blue, white, and grays to events, but not entirely replicate the black and white of black and white film. But now let's get into coming up with a realistic faded metallic finish for the spade. So I've got a couple of old tools out in the shed, and I've leaned towards this spade, as you see here, sort of the model for what I'm going to be basing this on. There's a technique that I first tried in my last kit, the X Plus Marilyn Monroe kit, called salt chipping, where you use salt to come up with a realistic faded and chipped, worn away paint effect on metal, and I'm hoping for the same level of success here, although we'll be using a different color scheme. So salt chipping, you give a base coat to your metallic piece, come back, and the base coat is a Tamiya silver with Tamiya flat clear, and get it a little bit wet. And then I've got a mixture of fine sea salt and a little bit of a coarser grain kosher salt, and sprinkle the salt crystals different areas. I mostly want to concentrate along the edges. So and you don't want it too chunky. Or else it'll completely spoil the look. Also, as I discovered with the Maryland kit, is want to make sure that there's a good contrast between the base color and your top coat. The first time I tried this, there wasn't enough contrast, and you really could not see that chip paint finish. So I had to really sand it all back down, put it back in the paint box, and go for a new coat. But now I think that this is a good coating of our fine grain salt, and it's time to go into the paint box and give it a few dustings of what will be the rust finish paint job. After devoting a full Saturday and Sunday, Father's Day Sunday at that, I've got this spade head looking great. I'm very happy with it and ready to attach it to the spade handle. After the salt chipping that I applied and showed in the previous portion, I placed in the paint box. First gave it a coat of Tamiya dull red, very light dusting, shouldn't call it a coat, it was really a very fine dusting of dull red. When that dried, gave it a dusting of NATO brown. When that dried, gave it a very fine top dusting of titanium silver. And it was really looking great. I brushed away all of the salt with a toothbrush and a little bit of a cocktail toothpick for the portions that didn't come off too easily, and it looked great. I thought, you know what, it just needs just a tiny bit more of a rust color. Put it back in the paint box, gave it a little bit of a dusting, decided it needed just a little bit of a black finish, and guess what, the nozzle on my flat black just spat paint, big blobs went everywhere, huge disaster. Had to let it all dry, sand it all back off, including all the paint, all the salt, and then start from scratch. Once again, place the salt around the edges. Well, once I'd given it its base coat of Tamiya silver, applied the salt around the edges, and then went back and very carefully layered up the dull red, NATO brown, and titanium silver, and didn't go with the black. I figured I'd had a little bit of bad luck with that black. So what I did after that was mixed up a watered down coat of Liquitex Ivory Black. I mixed up some Liquitex Ivory Black and did a wash, a very light wash, and gave over the metallic silver finish. Now I left the salt chips on to do this. When that wash of Liquitex Black had dried, came back in, and again to replicate this rust colored that is on the spade that was out in the shed, I mixed up a couple different colors of pyrrole crimson, cardamom orange, Indian yellow, burnt umber, and the tiniest bit of ivory black. Of course, all Liquitex paints. Made different strength washes of those various colors and gave everything just the most basic, lightest wash. And so you can see that in areas like in here and down in here, you can see that that rusted color. Once everything dried, then I came back and scraped away all of the table salt to reveal the areas such as here, here, and here in these places. And this is what the salt chipping is all about. Once all that salt had been scraped away, you can see some of that original silver base shining through those other colors, as if this is an old and faded and beat up shovel from too many years of digging up bodies in Edinburgh. So the next step is going to be attach the spade head to the spade handle. Not quite sure if I'm happy with these wrought iron pieces right here that go on the base. They may be a little bit too colorful. I tried to achieve a rusted finish. I'm just not sure if I'm really happy with that. They may be too distracting, and I might just hit them with a flat black. I gave the nameplate, after giving it a base coat of flat black, a very fine dusting of Krylon Peekaboo Blue. Isn't that a great name for a paint color? Peekaboo Blue. So if you follow my Walker Street Shipyards multi-chapter build of the Polar Lights 1/350 scale Enterprise Refit Kit, Chapter 5 of that build series has a pretty lengthy explanation of how I went on a journey to come up with and discovered Krylon's Peekaboo Blue. I'm very happy with the color of the bridge domes and the different detail pieces on the Enterprise. I'm glad I had a few cans of it tucked away after that build was done, because I think there's a really great finish. The fine dusting of the Peekaboo Blue over the flat black base has a really nice, almost gray finish. So now I'm going to come back in and do the details of the lettering. Welcome to the wrap-up of this Walker Street Shipyards build chapter for the bust of Boris Karloff from the 1945 RKO film, The Body Snatcher. This kit was sculpted by Jeff Yeager and produced by Pestilence Labs. Followers of Walker Street Shipyards know that I've been building model kits for many years, well, decades. This is my first ever bust, and the first resin kit that I've taken on in quite a few years. This build and this build chapter took a bit longer than I thought it would when I first set out. I mentioned at the start of the chapter that it was a cold, dreary, rainy weekend as I undertook the first primer coats on the base. That was back in mid-March, and here we are just a few days after July 4th, and I'm finally wrapping up the build, finally wrapping up this chapter. Like I said, a lot of life has happened during that time, but it's been mostly great, and I'm extremely happy with the way this kit has turned out, because it's been a great kit and a great sculpt by Jeff Yeager and a lot of fun to build. Jeff has been a significant creative force for the figure model hobby for many years and has designed and sculpted a lot of great kits available through a number of companies. Before he was sculpting great model kits that ended up on the shelves of hobby shops and the workbenches of model builders, Jeff Yeager was an actor. Check out his IMDb profile and you can see he's been in a lot of great movies and TV shows. In the late 90s, Jeff had some downtime between gigs, and frustrated with the quality of a kit that he had worked on, he tried his hand at sculpting. He sculpted one of his favorite movie monsters, the werewolf from the Hammer films, Curse of the Werewolf, so you can see that Jeff also has great taste in horror films. He was very happy with it, and so he put one of those sculpts in the window of a local hobby shop in LA, and that kit sold within an hour. So the subsequent sales and the success of that resin kit of the werewolf from Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf became the foundation for the emerging garage kit hobby that was growing in the late 90s. From there, companies like Sideshow Collectibles, Mobius Models, Pegasus, and others were launched, and Jeff Yeager sculpted kits for all of them. Which brings us to the present and the Body Snatcher bust. Again, this is a fantastic sculpt from Jeff Yeager. Pestilence Labs is the company that took that sculpt and cast and made the molds. Mark Worthling and his team did a fantastic job with the casting. I love the quality of this sculpt and all of the details, which really brings a lot of life and character to this build. Particularly, I like this little snarl on Karloff's face right here. This has been a really fantastic kit to build. Before I wrap up this build chapter on this fantastic kit, this bust of Boris Karloff from the 1945 RKO film, The Body Snatcher, I want to talk a little bit about the director of that film, Robert Wise. Full transparency, Robert Wise is my all-time favorite film director, so I wanted to talk a little bit about his career. Robert Wise was the editor on the 1939 Hunchback of Notre Dame film directed by William Dieterle with Charles Laughton as the Hunchback. It's the film many consider the definitive vision for the Victor Hugo classic story. Orson Welles then personally hand-picked Wise as the editor for Citizen Kane. And based on that work, again, asked him to work on his second film, The Magnificent Ambersons. When Welles was unable to completely finish The Magnificent Ambersons, RKO Pictures then tasked Wise with substantially revising and cutting the roughly 142-minute first cut down to about 90 minutes. It was an almost impossible assignment, but Wise did what he could following studio dictates, which dramatically revised Orson Welles' vision for the film. Orson Welles, sadly many film fans to this day, never forgave Robert Wise for making those revisions. But he was just doing what he was assigned to do, and if he hadn't undertaken that to make those cuts himself, RKO had threatened to hire another in-house director to heavily recut the film. At least Wise had been with the production from the beginning and had a great sense of the overall vision of the film's themes. Wise's career continued after Magnificent Ambersons, and he served as editor on the excellent rural Gothic film The Devil and Daniel Webster in 1941. After RKO producer Val Lewton selected Wise to direct The Return of the Cat People, a sequel to the very popular and successful moneymaker, The Original Cat People, Wise directed The Body Snatcher, released in 1945. It's an excellent film. Karloff is just outstanding as cabman turned grave robber John Gray. Bela Lugosi is also in it, by the way, as Karloff's none too bright accomplice. And you know, a bust of Lugosi's character from that film would make a great accompanying piece for this Karloff bust. Just saying. So here's just a few of the films that Robert Wise continued to direct throughout his long and distinguished career. The Day the Earth Stood Still in 1951, Run Silent, Run Deep with Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster, 1958. West Side Story in 1961. After West Side Story, Robert Wise directed what many consider the finest haunted house movie ever made, The Haunting, which was a really great horror film, in 1963. Then The Sound of Music in 1965. The Andromeda Strain, written by Michael Crichton, in 1971. Then one of my personal all-time favorite films, Star Trek, the motion picture, in 1979. Directed a lot of other films in addition to those throughout his career. What a career that has been. So what's going to be the next build here at Walker Street Shipyards? Well, like I showed when I started on the body snatcher and put down the primer coat on the stone base, I went ahead and gave primer coats on these two bases and went ahead and gave them a shot of, to me, it's flat black. For Jeff Yeager's sculpt of the Hammer Studios Dracula figures, Christopher Lee as Dracula, and his arch nemesis Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. I'm looking forward to continuing on with kits, excellent sculpts by Jeff Yeager. Looking forward to these builds. This will also be my first ever build of a Peter Cushing character. So please join me in the next chapter as we continue at Walker Street Shipyards, and remember, keep on building.